Good morning. My name is Carol Rowan, and I have the honor of being your worship associate this morning. We welcome everyone here and online to the Unitarian Universalist Church of Roanoke, with a special welcome to those who are joining us for the first time. We hope you stay after the service for coffee in the fellowship hall. For those of you online, who wish to share your joys and concerns during the Lifelines portion of this service, please put them in the chat in the next 15 minutes. Our minister is the Reverend Walter LaFleur, and while he is away this week, today's service will be led by Dr. Rob Willingham and is entitled, Who Perpetrated the Holocaust? Dr. Willingham is chair of the history department at Roanoke College, where he has been teaching since 2003. He received his bachelor's degree from Fort Lewis College, a master's from Purdue University, and his PhD from the University of Texas at Austin. His research and teaching is in modern Europe with a specialization in German Jewish history. He has written several publications, including a book which is entitled Jews in Leipzig, Germany Under Nazism, Communism, and Democracy, Politics and Identity in the 20th Century, and that was published in 2011. He has been recognized multiple times for his teaching, including receiving the Dean's Exemplary Teaching Award in 2008. He has been married to Nancy since 1991, and their daughters, Molly and Sydney, graduated from Roanoke College in May. Rob currently serves as the vice chair of the Salem City Democratic Committee and is a former member of this church and several of its committees. Some of you probably know him if you've been longtime members. We are pleased to welcome him back to join us today from the pulpit. Now, please take a moment to silence your cell phones. Now, if you choose, please join me in reciting our words of welcome. That's Aaron. Whomever you love, however you express your identity, whatever your situation in life, whatever your experience of the holy, as you come seeking love, your presence here is a gift. Whether you're filled with sadness or overcome with joy, needing to be alone with yourself or eager to engage with others, all who welcome all are welcome here. And our covenant. We commit to supporting each other with respect and direct communication as we work in community to explore spiritual growth and to be a force for good in the world.
I'm going to play some of my Kol Nidre fantasy, which is written about the famous Kol Nidre prayer in the Jewish religion, the high holidays. And I made a fantasy out of it.
Indeed, indeed. Our first opening words today are by Martin Niemöller, a prominent German pastor who was an early Nazi supporter, but who later changed his opinion. He was imprisoned in 1937 for opposing Hitler's regime. Later, with regrets about his early complicity in Nazism, he spoke these well-known words. First, they came for the socialists, and I did not speak out because I was not a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionists, and I did not speak out because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. Then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak for me. And words from Senator Tim Kaine. Most of the evil in the world is only partly because of an evil person. Most of it is because of the complicity of bystanders. We now light our chalice as a symbol of the Unitarian Universalist faith.
May the light we now kindle inspire us to use our powers to heal and not to harm, to help and not to hinder, to bless and not to curse, to serve you, O Spirit of life.
Good morning. My name is Jessie McEwen. I'm the Director of Lifespan Faith Development here, and I'd like to invite all young people and young at heart to come forward. We've got something to talk about this morning. You can just have a seat. So I have a quick question. My friend was being bullied. I'm allowed to tell this story. He told me I can tell this story. His name is Christopher. We call him Chris. He was being treated badly by people around him because he dyed his hair blue. He didn't look like everybody at school, so they were making fun of him for his blue hair. And I didn't know what to do. What would you have done in that situation? Ooh, that's a tough one. Damien, what you got? Tell an adult. What you got? Yeah, dye your hair blue so that he isn't the only one who's different. I think a lot of people in here would be willing to dye their hair blue, judging by that reaction. What else could I do? Okay, I got another question. Damien said, tell an adult. Now, what should that adult do? Jokes are sometimes good. They sometimes work to diffuse a situation. What should an adult do if I tell them? Talk to who? Talk to the person who's being a bully. Oh, see if they're having a problem. See if what's going on with them might be causing them to make fun of Chris and his blue hair. And then maybe me and my blue hair because I dyed it like Zane told me to. What else should that adult do? Anything else? Should they talk to maybe Chris and check in with Chris? What if that adult doesn't want to do those things? What if that adult says, you know what, Chris shouldn't have blue hair at school? Call the police. I mean, that's a fair reaction. Maybe you go home and tell your parents, and your parents are the ones who advise you to go higher than that teacher, than that adult. Who is in charge of the teachers at school? The principal. Who's in charge of the principal? Do you know? Superintendent. Who's in charge of the superintendent? The government. But what if we go all the way up and they all say, you know what? Chris shouldn't be in school with blue hair. That's what'd you say? That's really stupid. I agree. I absolutely agree. It sounds like those giggles out there agreed with you. But what if it got all the way up there and they made a new law that you can't go to school if your hair is blue? And it's a really dumb law. But think about it. There's been laws like this before, and the adults are going to talk about Nazi Germany today and these laws that came about. And sometimes it's hard for us at your age, sometimes even at my age, to deal with those laws that come out and say, you cannot, you shall not, you must not. But we can put ourselves in a place to help, even if it's just dyeing our hair blue, like Zane said to do, so that Chris is not alone. We want to make sure that nobody is alone. We're actually going to go talk a little bit about this in Jedi Academy. And we are not dyeing our hair blue. I'm sorry, Emma. But we're going to head out to Jedi Academy. I know some of you came here just to dye your hair blue. But we're going to talk about those people that we can trust in our lives and how we can be one of those people that we can trust. Let's go.
Go now in peace, go now in peace. May the love of God surround you everywhere, everywhere you may go.
Our reading today is from the book On Repentance and Repair by Rabbi Danya Ruttenberg. The work of repentance, all the way through, is the work of transformation. It's the work of facing down false stories and engaging with painful reality. It's the work of being open to seeing ourselves as we really are, of understanding that other people's needs and pain are at least as important, if not more so, than our own. It's about figuring out how to be the kind of person who sees others suffering and takes responsibility for any role we might have in causing it. It's about ownership, owning who we have been and what we have done, and also owning the person that we are capable of becoming. The critical fifth and last stage of this process is that the perpetrator must, when faced with the opportunity to cause similar harm in the future, make a better choice. This can happen only if they've done the deep work of understanding why the harm happened, stayed out of situations that would make the harm easy to perpetrate again, and reoriented themselves and their life in a totally different way. When these steps have been taken, the choice will happen naturally because the person making it is a changed person in the ways that matter. And now, Dr. Willingham.
I'm always grateful to have the opportunity to talk to people about these ideas. It means more for me to be here today. This community has meant a lot to me and my family. Watching the kids being sung out just now, my kids got sung out of this room for years to that song. Made a lot of difference in their lives and mine too. Thank you. The thing that was attractive to me about the Unitarian Church is in some ways the same thing that has been attractive to me about the study of the Holocaust. The thing I like about this church is that it demands that the most important questions of being a human be asked. This church is, on the other hand, not a source of easy answers. It's an institution that tells us to eschew the easy answer. And I think similarly, a study of the Holocaust, if done properly, requires us to ask all of the most serious questions about you being a human being. Not to put too fine a point on it, but it always keeps coming back to the same place. How could this happen? How could other human beings do this? And I struggle with my students and with myself, and I have my whole life, and I always will, trying to figure that out. What is the juxtaposition between my genuine faith in the goodness of human beings and my knowledge through which any theology must pass of what actually happened? This question of who did it is what's driving me here today. It is perfectly obvious to all of us that the men in uniform did it, that the SS men, that the guards did it, that Nazi members did it. But there are much larger and harder questions to be asked than that. Now, it is certainly true that the vast majority of Germans were not perpetrators of the Holocaust in the traditional sense. But it leads us to this other important category. And we have Raoul Hilberg to thank for this, the doyen of American Holocaust studies, who said that the most important role ordinary Germans had to play was not as the perpetrator, but as the bystander. Without at least neutrality, the German government could not have done what it did to its Jewish citizens, much less to the rest of the Jews of Europe and to the other victims of the Holocaust. Now, there is no doubt in my mind that the bystander is an indispensable ingredient of the genocide. There were certainly never close to enough Nazis or SS men or guards to do what they did. Like any extreme or utopian or depraved historical moment, the Holocaust was utterly dependent on a vacuum of people who decided that politics were beneath them, or that the cut on their neighbor's hand did not cause them to bleed, at least sufficiently to act. And so there is no doubt about the importance of the category of the bystander. Wickedness thrives in the absence of good people willing to risk their happiness, their convenience, their prosperity, much less their lives. For what? For the cause of their neighbors' lives? For some abstract notion of right and wrong or the will of the divine? This is insufficient to most people most of the time. As Elie Wiesel reminded his audience at the end of every talk, the opposite of love is not hate, but indifference. This is hard enough. This is bad enough. This causes us to ask difficult enough questions. But what I want to talk about is some ways worse. What if it goes beyond neutrality? What if Gentile civilian Germans were more than mere bystanders in the face of a top-down terror, more than just window dressing in the appearance of this rabidly anti-Semitic government that just disappears in the rubble 12 years later? We can make an argument for the German civilian population being detached from the Holocaust. It is absolutely true that the Jewish German population was the best integrated in Europe. It is true that if you were going to predict in 1900 that a genocide were to occur in 1940, you never would have said Germany, ever in a million years. You would have said Russia or Poland or Ukraine. And yet, this happened. It is true that the first attempts of the Nazi government to whip up popular anti-Semitism were failures. In 1933, there's a broad boycott that most Gentile Germans ignore. And even as late as 1938, the Kristallnacht riots, more ordinary Germans expressed disapproval than participated. And we know that the government knew this because one of their first orders that day was to tell the perpetrators not to wear their uniforms. They wanted them in civilian clothes. They wanted to make the argument that this was a bottom-up terror. And still, I want to suggest to you, to ask you to think about the possibilities that perpetrators as we understand them, SS men, stormtroopers, are not sufficient to explain the Holocaust, even given the inactivity of bystanders. My suggestion is that even in the depth of the Nazi regime, even in the furious pogrom against the Jews of Germany of the 1930s, there were politics still being done, that the regime was less totalitarian than we think, and that critically, the terror was driven by a different kind of perpetrator, a distinctively modern one, a civilian, a citizen, using the mechanism of their own political system to push it the way they wanted. And what they wanted wasn't a better hearing for their Jewish neighbors. What they wanted wasn't even more prosperity for themselves. What they wanted, and this is what we have to think about, what they wanted was a more focused and cruel persecution of their German neighbors, and they got it. My research makes clear that ordinary Germans at the local level did have an influence over their government. And it was not as bystander, much less opponent of the genocide. Over and over again, there is evidence of ordinary Germans using the mechanisms of the press, letters to their political leaders, phone calls, to direct the Nazi state to what we can only call greater evil. These people are perpetrators. So, for instance, in 1941, a salesman of essential oils named Leo Tuscher denounced a competitor named Max Schall. The two of them had been going after it since 1922. There had been an argument over the quality of some lemon oil. Now, Max was passing. He was half Jewish. Leo denounces him to the Gestapo to further his own aims. Max is taken by the Gestapo and murdered in Auschwitz in 1941. We know that the Gestapo was a less powerful and a less well-funded organization than we thought it was. We know that the Gestapo and the mechanism of terror in the Nazi regime was dependent on these denunciations. The horrifying and depressing thing is that they got them. Sometimes it's more complicated. It's in the case of a woman named Annie Hoffmann. Annie's husband was a member of the local Nazi party in the city of Leipzig. And Annie wrote to a local Nazi magazine, the local edition of Der Stürmer, to talk about something happening in Leipzig. Now, her problem was that a laundry room in a nearby apartment development was being used by Jews in the neighborhood as an emergency synagogue during the High Holy Days. Their synagogue had already been shut down. And Annie wanted the Stürmer to know that this was happening. Powerless one stands before these events, she writes, and it takes real discipline to walk by as if nothing were happening. What do you say, dear Stürmer? And what would the Führer Adolf Hitler say if he had to observe all of this? Could you not publish this example as a horrible, horrible problem? And it worked. The party stepped in, intervening with the local government. Quote, the agitation among the party comrades has gotten very strong, especially during the interminable Feast of the Tabernacles, so that I myself, a city official, had to step in to avoid any rash steps. I would welcome it very much if the Jews' perpetration of their religious practices, let that phrase sink in, their perpetration of their religious practices, which is often connected to very loud noises, were forbidden in the development. And then I was able to trace this. Shortly thereafter, an internal memo appears in the 24th Police Precinct. They sent the police out to look. And the policeman reports back that it's all nonsense. That in fact, it had never been used as a washroom because it had never been connected to the hot water main. That it was the only synagogue in walking distance on the Sabbath. And that when they were supposed to close down, they did quietly, and there had never been any complaints whatsoever. This is fascinating to me, this back and forth between an ordinary Gentile German, the party, the state, and the local police. And it's the local police by far with the greatest expression of reason and empathy, but it doesn't matter. This created crisis was sufficient. And even though the police on the beat were not shy about saying so, even though there was no meaningful risk, the police president intervened. He was a political appointee over his beat cops. And in fact, the washroom synagogue would be shut down by the end of the year. It's a clear example. There's politics being done in Nazi Germany. There are gaps in totalitarianism. It's just not the ones we want to see. And it's not people acting the way we would want them to act. The most commonly expressed dissatisfaction on the part of non-Jewish residents had to do with the great forested park of Leipzig, the Rosenthal, It goes back to 1318. It was the hunting grounds of the local lord. It's great, it's beautiful, it's gorgeous. In summer of 1937, a local engineer named Hans Schmidt enclosed a clipping from another Nazi newspaper, this time in Berlin, talking about a park in Berlin, which had just put up signs on their benches that said "For Juden verboten." And Schmidt wanted to know why Leipzig couldn't follow the example. And so here we have someone in a locale seeing what's happening in another place. He now starts writing letters, and it gathers momentum. Ordinary citizens began to urge that Jews be banned from the park. A letter appears to the mayor saying that young Jewish men are bullying German grandmas off of the benches. Something had to happen. He went on to hope that maybe the city could set up medieval-style ghettos. This goes to hideous, ridiculous places. There was this woman named Frau E.Z., almost certainly not her name. She wrote these horrible little poems to the Leipziger Tageszeitung, the daily paper, on current events. She wrote one in September of 38. Now I'm going to read it in German so you can get the rhyme, but then I'll read you the English version. This is Frau E.Z. complaining about Jews in the park. Das ganze Foto Rosenthal befolgen Juden, Odensaal. Und gerade uns im Zentrum drin nach frischer Luft steht oft der Sinn, zumal für unsere kleinen Kinder ist bald statt Stinkluft, halt gesunde. Geht mit ihnen mal spazieren, so muss ich schon weit mal marschieren, ehe wir mal sitzen, Gott sei Dank, auf judenfreien Park. Okay, so. The whole front park of the Rosenthal is occupied by innumerable Jews. And after all, we go there from downtown to get fresh air, especially for our little children. Forest air is healthier than stinky air. If I go with them for a walk, we have to wander quite a lot before we sit, Gott sei Dank, thank God, on a Jew-free bench. No one made Frau Easy write this, right? This isn't a top-down terror. No one put a gun to her head. She's not brainwashed. You know, what do we really understand about the totalitarian regimes? How much do our presumptions about the lack of human agency inside of those regimes also serve to distance ourselves from the people who watched crimes or who committed crimes? They were able to do nothing else. That's just not true. A few months later, in between, Kristallnacht has happened. Another letter writer to the daily paper saw a note published with the screaming headline, "They're still sitting there." The writer complained that Jews were still sitting in the Rosenthal. He said that local Jews might have been expected to figure out that things had changed by the events of November of 1938. But instead, quote, "the Isaacs and Sarahs sit happily blinking in the sun as though nothing had happened." He demanded that signs be put up banning Jews. And then the police department. A police report did what they always did, the same thing. They go and report and they say, no, there's actually plenty of benches. No German grannies are being bumped off by arrogant young Jewish men. It didn't matter. Because by then the momentum had built, a series of letters between local party and city hall and Gestapo. The Gestapo writing the mayor, relaying parental complaints. Jewish mothers and their children show a preference for making themselves so comfortable on the benches that for racial comrades, Volksgenossen, there is no possibility of sitting down. Besides which, he says to the mayor, it is too much to expect any Aryan mother to go with their children there. The presence of Jewish mothers brings with it the automatic disadvantage that German-blooded children play with Jewish children. And it worked. The city issued a ban on Jews in the Rosenthal and the other parks in the town. And the letter from the Gestapo to the mayor is essentially cut and paste in the final order. Yeah, I can't find a more concrete example of these things happening from a grassroots level. Local parents complain to the Gestapo complains to the mayor, then something gets done. This is not how we think about these things happening. The dynamic here is, I'm arguing, a microcosm of what happened not just in Leipzig, but all over Germany. That various elements of a community, city bureaucrats, writers of cranky letters to the editor, Party and police officials of various stripes would demand that something be done. And at times, those demands are actually met with pushback from a city government, seemingly more concerned with maintaining order and providing services than enforcing the racial code of the Nazi Party, even when the local leadership came from the Nazi Party. But in time, invariably, in time, more and more elements of a locale's administration would show themselves willing to play ball, especially after letters from parents and ordinary citizens were joined from the Gestapo, the SD, from the party. There are several things worth noting here. One is that anti-Semitic measures were at times driven as much from below as from above. Elements of officialdom were at times driven to persecute Jews more quickly and vigorously than they would otherwise have done because of ordinary people in their towns. And the only suggestions of mercy come from police reports. What can we conclude from this sorry tale? I didn't come here today just to tell you a series of sad stories. We are reminded, as we must be, that the Holocaust was a human event. And this is where I start every one of my classes. And if you remember one thing from me today, please remember this, that the Holocaust was a human event. It was not done by brown-shirted aliens who left 12 years later. It was not done because someone introduced something strange into the Rhine River. It was not done because the Germans were brainwashed, and it was not done because of the will of God. There is no sacred meaning in the Holocaust in that way. It was an event perpetrated by humans on other human beings. And so it begs the question, who are we and what are we capable of? And as always, when we ask about the Holocaust, we ask these harder questions. And so we're obliged to come back to this conclusion, as horrible as it is, that the terror was not just dependent on, but driven by human motivations. Although those motivations are repulsive to us, almost to the point of incomprehensibility, the Holocaust was not something done by a Germany forced at gunpoint by the Nazis. All too often, the opposite was true, that the state was driven by ordinary men and women. And so what do we know? It's one of the things I take for granted in my own theology, that God is only active in the world in as much as we are active in the world. To the extent that I have a theology that makes sense to me and makes me function in the world, it is that God operates through me and potentially through all human beings when they are in touch with what God is, and that's in all of us, whether you call that God or anything else. But what this makes clear is that the devil needs hands in the world too, that evil is dependent on you and me, just as godness is, just as God is. And so we can find out from this that the relationship between fascists, and I would suggest neo-fascists, and their followers is a complicated one, in which the apparent master can spend more time and effort dancing to the audience-chosen tune than we might imagine. And by the same token, that leaders need permission. It's a complicated dynamic between the leader who breaks norms and their followers. But I think all too often we emphasize the former rather than the latter. What is a fascist or a neo-fascist politician without their following? It's just a lunatic screaming. I want to point out too, and here I hope to offer some hope. I want to point out to you how much of this happened on a local level. We think of Nazism being a tightly centralized and controlled society. In many ways it was, but an awful lot of our perception of that was because the Nazis wanted people to think that. It was actually a pretty slipshod operation in a lot of ways, but they were dependent on control, on the perception of control. To be sure, there would have been no Holocaust without the Nazi intention. I don't want to overstate the importance of local autonomy. But we are told in this story of the surprising power of individuals, ordinary people, to influence their surroundings for evil, but why not for good? This seems heartening to me. This gives me hope. There was nothing inevitable about the Holocaust, just as there is nothing inevitable about the durability of liberal democracy in America. They are dependent on human works. There has never been anything inevitable about the durability of liberal democracy in America. Maybe we're a little bit more aware of that now than we used to be. All I would say in closing is that when we look at what happened in Germany, that we become aware of the potential of ordinary people to do evil, but that we insist on looking at it from the other angle, that we remind ourselves of the power of ordinary people to do good. And so that's what I ask of you. And I know that I am almost literally preaching to the choir here, but do that. Engage in your community. Write a letter, get to know an elected official, try to make your values a little bit more real where you live. This story tells us that we have that power. Please realize the power you have and embrace it. Because if you don't, someone else will. Thank you all very much.
The work of this church requires the time, talent, and treasure of many people. As we collect today's offering, you may reflect on what our church has done in the past to further the goals which uphold our principles and what we could do in the future. We thank you for your contributions to further the mission and work of this church.
Good morning, I'm Terry Smith, representing the Caring Committee this week. Part of our service to the community is to communicate joys and concerns that our members and friends may be dealing with at this time. You are invited to share through a member of the committee or through the church office during regular hours to have it shared in this portion called Lifelines. This morning, we have several reasons to lift up extra love and light for our friends. I will begin with Ronald Wilson, who is here today. Ronald's dog, Wygon, passed away from a blood disorder on Wednesday of this week. Please keep Ronald in your thoughts. Condolence calls and cards would be greatly appreciated, welcomed. His address is in our most recent directory, and I have the information with his phone number if you want to see me during coffee hour or call the church office during regular hours. We also ask you to hold Neenan Heights' family in your hearts for the next several weeks. Her granddaughter, Natalie, is on her way to Boston for open heart surgery to replace the pulmonary valve that was put in when she was just 10 months old. She's a very strong, brave young girl, Neenan says, but prayers and blessings are welcome. And finally, from Leah Whitney via our morning chat, thank you. You may have heard about the woman who was assaulted last Sunday on Big Lick Greenway. She was a UU member, Melissa Curry. She has a concussion and she is recovering at home. So please keep her in your thoughts as well. And now, if you would like to come forward to light a candle to express a joy or concern in your heart, we invite you to come up forward, and Carol will help me so we can use both sides of the altar.
I am sending you light to heal you, to hold you. I am sending you light to hold you in love. I am sending you light to heal you, to hold you. I am sending you light to hold you in love. No matter where you go, no matter where you've been, you'll never walk alone. I feel you deep within, so I am sending you light to heal you, to hold you. I am sending you light to hold you in love. I am sending you light to heal you, to hold you. I am sending you light to hold you in love. No matter what you feel or what you choose to show, I'm always there for you. And so I want you to know that I am sending you light to hold you, to hold you. I am sending you light to hold you in love. I am sending you light to heal you, to hold you. I am sending you light to hold you in love.
May our prayers be heard and our hearts lifted.
The prayer today is a prayer for forgiveness. It's entitled, "Here is the Place to be Forgiven" by Katie Kandarian Morris. Spirit of life, spirit of love, spirit of generosity, as we draw near to that quiet, essential side of ourselves, may we open enough to consider the sacred choices we make each minute, each hour, each day that add up to a lifetime. Let us become aware that here is the place to be forgiven and to forgive ourselves for any past thoughts and actions. Here is the place to begin again with love. As we are forgiven, let us open our hearts to forgive others, to pray for them well-being and joy, that they be lifted from worry and burden into peace and abundance. May we all be blessed with riches of the Spirit and moment upon moment of peace and serenity. Amen. There are several announcements listed in today's bulletin. I wanted to mention on a personal note that I was up in Washington, D.C. this past week and was able to go to the Holocaust Museum. It's been several decades since I'd been there. And one of the things I noticed, among many things, was when I went in the gift shop, and I saw later they had this all over, they have things that say, "What you do matters." And I thought that's really fits. They don't say what you don't do matters, but that also is true. Another announcement is that our library is holding an open house today in the library right after the service. Cindy Lawler, where are you, Cindy? I just saw. Cindy Lawler has done a wonderful job in rearranging and the books and making it more usable for everyone. And we encourage everybody to come and see and learn what's new there. Thank you, Cindy. Well, gosh, I'm overwhelmed. I want to say thank you to people who've helped make this service very meaningful and heartfelt. Dr. Willingham, our musical parts. Catherine, thank you very much for your blending your voice today. Carrie, as always, wonderful. And Benedict, good friend. We leave this gathering without leaving our connection, concern, and caring for each other. May the warmth of this community sustain us as we are called to make this world more loving and compassionate. Go into your week in peace, and may the light of the chalice go with you. Amen.
Every other week. It appears, possibly.